In the 23 years that I've been helping clients implement ERP systems, it seems that they're all looking for that silver bullet, that magic rocket science reason why implementations succeed. The good news is that there's no magic formula to what makes ERP implementation succeed. I'm going to talk about the 10 things that you need to know to make your ERP implementation successful. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journeys. And as I mentioned at the start of the video, clients are always looking for the answers of what do we need to do differently to make our project successful. And when they look at failures, and when we look at failures back in history, it's the same mistakes that seem to get repeated over time. And part of the problem with this is that technology companies and software companies tend to overemphasize what the impact their technology will have on your chances for implementation success. And I'm here to tell you that technology has very little to do with how successful your implementation will be. And I want to talk about the 10 things that are in fact important to your implementation. It may sound simple, like a no-brainer, but the first thing is to have a clear strategy for what it is you want to accomplish with your ERP implementation. Too often companies say they're implementing new ERP systems because their old one is outdated, or their old one is not being supported anymore, or their vendor is forcing them into an upgrade, and that's the strategy they have. If that's your strategy, that's not nearly enough. We need to define what is your strategy in the context of your overall corporate strategy, and how is this ERP implementation going to help you achieve your strategic goals and objectives. Until we've done that, and until we have alignment on what your strategy is and how this project supports that strategy, we're shooting in the dark. We're going to be aimlessly wandering, trying to figure out how to implement ERP in a way that might make sense for the organization. So we need to have that clear strategy to start. Now, a common pitfall we see with a lot of organizations and consulting firms is that they'll overcomplicate the analysis and evaluation of potential ERP systems, and it'll take a long time to get to a decision of what ERP system or digital transformation technology they might be deploying. And we have to think of it from the context of limited resources. For every dollar an hour of time that we spend evaluating systems and thinking about which system could we be deploying, we could actually be investing that time and money in the actual implementation. And so we want to quickly get to the right decision as quickly as we can. We certainly want to do so in a way that's smart and effective, but we don't want to overanalyze the situation, and we don't want to get caught up in analysis paralysis. We want to save those time and resources for implementation, which is ultimately what will make your project the most successful. So along the same lines of not spending too much time on selection is to figure out where you're going to deploy your resources and where you're going to invest your time and money. And as I alluded to in the previous point, investing heavily in the implementation is generally going to serve you better than investing heavily or too heavily in the software evaluation and selection. Now, when we look at the implementation and the odds of success, I'll always bet on the implementation that maybe didn't find the perfect technology for their needs, but they implemented it really well. I'll always bet on that scenario versus the one that found the perfect technology that's a perfect fit for them, but they can't implement it well, or they don't invest the right amount of time and money in the implementation. So it's just a reminder, building on the previous point, that we want to really invest in a good, solid implementation, and we want to have a solid implementation plan that makes the most sense for us. Now, another key to implementation success is to be realistic and have the understanding that there are no silver bullets in implementations. There's no magic one-size-fits-all answer that's going to make your implementation easy. Whether you're talking about cloud solutions or best practices, industry pre-configured solutions, whatever buzzword you might be hearing from industry analysts or system integrators or software vendors, just remember there are no silver bullets. There's no easy way to go through this transformation. We might be able to make the technology a little bit easier, but we're not able to automate or have a silver bullet to make the people and the operational or process side of things easy. We still have to do the hard work and the heavy lifting related to that, and that's ultimately what's going to make the project successful. So recognize that there are no silver bullets in these sorts of transformations. Now, a root cause of failure, one thing that I've found time and time again with expert witness engagements that we've been involved with, where we testify in ERP failures. We testify in court to help the court figure out whose fault it was and how much different parties should be sued for. One of the common things we found is that failures often start with unrealistic expectations. We thought that we could implement the solution with this amount of time and money, but in reality it was never realistic. It was going to take this amount of time and money. And when we expect it to take this amount of time and money, we're going to inherently or naturally going to cut corners, and we're going to cut scope in areas we shouldn't be cutting scope. So when we only have this amount of time and money, we don't have time to do the change management. We don't have time to do data migration well. We don't have time to integrate with other systems. We don't have time to implement all the advanced modules we thought we were getting. So we end up cutting a lot of stuff that's really important to our ROI. We end up cutting it to fit within this unrealistic expectation that we should have never been operating from in the first place. So the key here is to have a realistic expectation and take any sort of proposed implementation time frame from your system integrator or your vendor with a grain of salt, and make sure that you add a dose of reality to that implementation plan before you commit to it. Now, I mentioned earlier the example of companies that end up committing to an ERP implementation because they have to replace their old system. And that's a classic example of what you shouldn't do in terms of treating this as a technology project. You should be treating this as a business transformation. And organizations that do so, that treat their projects as business transformations, that focus heavily on the operational and the organizational side of things, those companies are a lot more effective and successful in their implementations than the ones that invest heavily in technology but don't invest enough in the organization and people and process side of things. So really treat this as a business transformation. The process you're going through, the transformation you're going to is more of a business transformation, and you should treat it as such. And all the decisions you make, the planning you make, the strategy and the roadmap you lay out should reflect the fact that this is a business transformation, not a technology initiative. The next key to success is to be prepared for your implementation. A lot of times what happens is companies go through the evaluation and selection process, they reach that milestone of selecting the software, and the vendor and the system integrator convince them to just jump in and start implementing stuff. They start building stuff, they start testing stuff, and that stuff may or may not be aligned with your direction as a company. So you want to make sure that we avoid that dynamic of having a system integrator or vendor hijack the project from us and take over the project from us, and instead take the time between selection and implementation to get ready for the implementation, to plan, to build the blueprint, to mobilize your team, to make sure you do some initial training so that your team can be on even footing with your system integrator. All that stuff, the time you spend in that initial phase and that implementation planning phase of the project is extremely critical, and it's one of those things that you have to do to take a step back to be able to take 2 steps forward, is to take that time to focus on implementation planning and have a solid plan and blueprint before you jump into implementation. Another key to success is to have the right team supporting you. And this should be a hybrid of both internal resources and external resources. You want to make sure that you have your A players internally, the people that know your business the best, that are most open to change, that have the best vision for what the company could be. And in other words, the people that are going to be hardest to pull away from the day-to-day operations. Those are the people you want on your team. Those are the people you should commit to your team. And those are the people you should find a way to backfill them so that they can commit more time to your project. Now, as far as external resources, you certainly want to vet any sort of system integrator or technical consultant that is going to be on your project. I personally advise clients, and our team advises clients, on making sure that they vet for not only technical skills, but also cultural fit and just personality fit with the organization. Treat them as you would any other team member, and make sure that you vet the team members that are going to be on your project, since you're going to be paying for them. So vetting the right external resources, and also recognizing that you may also need third-party independent resources to help augment what the system integrator can or can't do in areas like organizational change management or data migration. Things like that are areas that your system integrator typically doesn't do well. And so you want to make sure that you've identified all those critical success factors, and that you have resources either internally or externally or both that can support those critical success factors. Now, the people side of the equation is likely to be the most difficult part of your transformation. You may get caught up in the technology and trying to figure out decisions around business processes. That stuff will be difficult at times as well, but the people side is almost assuredly going to be very difficult. So we want to make sure that we're erring on the side of over-investing in change management. In fact, I'd argue that too many organizations spend way too much time and money figuring out the technology, investing in the technology, and getting the technology to work versus maybe scaling that down, simplifying the technology, and doing a really good job on the people side of things and make sure that people understand roles and responsibilities, ensure they're actually using the technology, ensure that the processes are working the way they should be. If you overinvest in that area on the organizational change side of things, it's almost hard to fail in those cases. Where companies do fail is when they overinvest in technology, they run out of time and money and can't invest in organizational change. That ends up being one of the top reasons for failure. And so that's one of the top things you can do to ensure you succeed. The best ERP implementations I've seen have very solid quality assurance and risk mitigation. Usually third-party companies like Third Stage Consulting, that can agnostically and in an unbiased way look at what are the risks of this project, how do we keep the project on track, how do we mitigate risks, how do we fill in the gaps and identify the things that the system integrator might not be doing well, and how do we ensure that we address those areas. Those are all things that should be included within a quality assurance program and something that an effective risk mitigation strategy should achieve. So if you have that in place, that's going to help address any sort of problems that might come up throughout the transformation. So I've shared with you 10 things, 10 keys to success for your implementation. Now, we've actually published a white paper that has the 20 things that you should be keeping in mind. I've included a link to that paper below. It's called Lessons from 1,000 ERP Implementations. And in that paper, we cover the 10 things we talked about here today in more detail, and we also cover another 10 things that we didn't cover in today's video. So I encourage you to download that white paper. It'll give you all the best practices, technology agnostic guidance on what it is you need to do to make your transformation successful, regardless of what technology you might be implementing. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day.